So in this session, we'll understand the concept of processes. First of all, we'll see the process concept, then process scheduling, operations on processes, inter-process communication, communication in client-server systems. So first of all, let's have a look at process concept. So process and program both are related with each other, but there is a big difference between a program and a process. A program is a passive entity. Passive entity here means that a system is not affected by a program. Affection or the effect of a program on system means that the state of system is not changed because of a program. In simple words, we can say that, or by definition, a program is a set of instructions which are written for some specific purpose or which are responsible to solve some problem. Then we can say that this is a program. If I simply write int a and save it like 1.c, this is not a program. The first criteria that a set of instructions is fulfilled, but our second criteria that is written for a specific purpose or this program has to solve some problem is not fulfilled by this instruction. That's why we cannot say that it is a program, right? So I can say that a program is written for some specific purpose, and this program, when it is saved in the secondary storage or in the hard disk, it is a program because it is not changing any state of the system. Because of this program, my system is not going to change its state, right? There is no computation going on because of this simple program until it is not executed. Mind it, until it is not executed, till the point it is simply placed in a file in the secondary storage, it does not change state of my system, and it is called as a program, right? When this program is loaded into main memory and assigned the required resources that those are required to execute this program, it becomes the process, right? So a program plus the resources which are required for its execution, now this becomes your process, right? So program was your set of instructions which can solve some problem, right? Instructions which can solve problem, and when resources are allocated to this program for execution, Now it may change my system's state. It may change the content of memory. It may change the content of registers of the CPU. It may change the data on input-output devices. This program may change content of some file which been written by this program on the secondary storage, right? So this is what I mean to say that change in the system. All these things cannot happen simply because of a program, simply because of a file 1.c which contains a program to add two numbers and writing that result to a file sum.txt, right? Until this program is executed after allocating some resources, the content of this file may be changed. The content of secondary storage will be changed. During execution of this program, the register values of the CPU may be changed. The content of my RAM or your main memory may be changed, right? So because of execution of this program, your system is changing its state, and because of this we say that a process is an active entity. An active entity. It keeps on changing its state. A program will always be in one state. It will not change its state by itself. Whereas a process start from its creation to its termination, it keep on changing its state. It does not belongs to a single state, right? So this is about the execution of a process, and process is equal to the program code and the resources, associated resources. PC is the program counter that indicates the next instruction that has to be executed, and the status of process execution, that how much this process has been executed, what instructions have been executed, and what instructions are remaining, right? So what responsibility an operating system will be assigned regarding a process? An operating system will be responsible to create a process, to remove a process or destroy a process or terminate a process, controlling the process progress while its execution, acting on interrupts and arithmetic errors. That means During execution of a process, if any interrupt is submitted to the system, handling of that interrupt, and if any arithmetic error is occurred in your running process, how to handle that process is also the responsibility of operating system. Resource allocation to the processes. If multiple processes are there in the system, so which resource has to be allocated to which process, the track of this is also the responsibility of operating system. Inter-process communication, if there are multiple processes P1, P2, P3 up to Pn, say, so if data of one process output is required as an input to some other process, so this is providing of this data to required process is also the responsibility of operating system. So overall, these are the main focus functionalities which an operating system has to provide with regarding a process. We have said that a process is an active entity which keeps on changing its state. So a process may have 5 major states from its creation to termination. When a process is created, it will be submitted to the new state. From new state, it will be admitted to ready state. From ready state, it will be scheduled to run, where it resides in the running state. From running state, it may be suspended. If it is suspended, it will be submitted back to ready state. From running state, a process may be submitted to ready state when any interrupt is occurred in the system. From running state, a process may go to waiting state when some IO request is generated from this running process. From waiting state, once the IO event is completed, it will again submit it to ready state. Point to remember here is, from waiting state, a process cannot be directly submitted to running state because there may be some other process which is in the running state on the CPU. So until that running state comes out from this CPU, a new process has to wait, and a new process which has acquired all the resources except the CPU will be waiting in the ready state. And once a process is completed, it will be submitted to terminate state, right? So let's look these states in little bit more detail. Suppose I have a program for addition of two numbers, add.c, in my secondary storage. When I submit a request to execute this program to the system will pick up this file and will load this program into main memory. This is my main memory or the RAM. So in the main memory or the RAM, this program will be loaded, right? So when this program is being created, this program is being shifted to main memory, it will also assign an address space which corresponds to a process. In this address space, PCB is there, process control block, resources are there which are required to execute this process. So during this creation of process, this program belongs to the new state, right? So when a program is converted from a program to process, it is submitted to the new state. And once it acquires all the resources which are required for its execution, except the CPU, its state is changed from new to ready state. Its state is changed to ready state from the new state when all the resources which are required to execute this process except the CPU, its state is ready state, right? And once that process acquires the remaining resource which is CPU, it will be shifted to running state. From ready state, if it acquired CPU, it will shift it to running state, right? From running state, when some IO request is generated from this process, its state is changed from running to waiting state. Until the IO event is completed, it will remain in this waiting state. Once the IO is completed, it will change its state back to ready state. And from ready state, when it gets the CPU, it will again submit it to running state. Once its execution is done, it will be shifted to terminated state, right? So this is how a process changes its state since it has created till it has been terminated. So what all elements are there of a process? A process has its state, one of five states which right now just now we have seen. The program counter which shows which next instruction has to be executed, the CPU registers, that what values a CPU has at any point of time, right? Then CPU scheduling information, we will look scheduling information of processes in more detail, what algorithm normally an operating system has for scheduling a processes. Memory management information, here memory means the primary memory, accounting information, how much time it has already took for execution, the process number, etc. The IO status information, what IO devices it has acquired and what response it got from those IO devices. So all these are the elements of a process. Then the process control block. Every process has its process control block. When a process is created, its process control block is also gets created, which contains the process elements which we have seen in the last slide in this. The created and it has been created, PCB is created and managed by the operating system. It allows support for multiple processes. That means because of PCB, multiple processes may be created in the system at a time. How? Because each process has its separate address space, its separate process control block, and process control block contains all the state information of a process, all the resources holded by a process, the current state of a process, the current program counter of a process, and the most important, memory limits, which defines the address space of a process. Suppose a process has base address 200 and the limit as 100, right? This is my overall, suppose, memory. In memory, 200 is the starting base address of a process and its limit is 100. That means the last address will be 300. Many of the times you might have been come across an error which shows the segmentation fault error in the program, and this error mostly comes because of some address issue. The process is attempting to access address of a memory which is outside of this process scope, which is outside of its address space, right? Suppose this process P1 tries to access the memory location 350, which is out of its address space, because P1's address space is 200 plus 100, that is 300. So it can access the memory locations only between 200 and 300. When it tries to access address belongs to 350, it gives an error. That is the segmentation fault, right? So when multiple processes are there in my system, there has to be some mechanism by which I restrict a process to access another process's address space. I want to embed the enforcement of boundaries among processes so that two processes do not interfere with each other, right? So this address space information is also placed in PCB, and it supports the multiple processes in the same system at the same time. So a PCB can be defined as the manifestation of a process in an operating system. It is also known as a process descriptor or task control block, which controls the task. It also supports the suspension and resuming a process from the previous state, because previous state is saved in the PCB. Suppose at any point of time the CPU was executing or computing some instruction, so those instructions will be, or those values of CPU will be, CPU registers will be saved back to PCB of the process control block, as well as it also stores the program counter in the main memory, and when next time this process gets again executed, it will be resumed from the last state when it was suspended, and this is possible only because of PCB contents. So PCB may include the current state of the process, unique identification of the process, that is also called as process ID, PID in the short form, pointer to the process's parent process, pointer to the process's child process, process's priority. Process's priority may be required to schedule the process. We will look the scheduling of processes in detail in our later sessions. Pointers to locate the process's memory, that where this process is located in the main memory, at what location. Pointers to allocate resources, what resources are acquired by this particular process is also stored in the PCB. A register save area, where CPU's register values will be saved when this process is suspended, or will be used to resume the process when it gets its turn to execute next time. The processor on which process is running. If process has been executed in multi-processing environment, then the information about the processor, where the processor was running, is also saved in the process control block. So when multiple processes are there in my main memory, a context switch may also take place. Before going to context switch, you might have seen that suppose your system contains one CPU. If your system is having only one CPU, how many processes can be executed in this CPU at a time? Only one process. So if only one process can be executed in CPU at a time, how it is possible to work on Windows Media Player and Microsoft Office at the same time? You might be listening to music while preparing your reports. You might be listening music in VLC while preparing your PowerPoint slides. How does it possible? If we say that only one process is allowed to execute at a time in a CPU. Yes, that is not the parallel execution of processes. That is the concurrent execution of processes. Concurrent execution means there are two processes, Windows Media Player and your Microsoft Office, which are executed in the concurrent manner and switching of CPU among these two processes is so frequently so that you are not able to recognize whether they are executed in concurrent manner or they are executed in parallel. So context switching among processes is so frequent so that it is looks like it just look like system is executing these two processes in parallel, right? So this switching of one process to another process is called as context switch. So when CPU switches to another process, the system must save the state of the old process and load the saved state of the new process. So must save the state of the old process. Where to save the old state of old process? In the corresponding PCB. And where PCB is residing? In the main memory. So CPU has to save the register values as well as the program counter of the old process into the main memory in the PCB of corresponding process. And the new process's state which is saved in the main memory has to be loaded to the CPU to resume that process. And this task is did because yes, so that we can resume this process in the future, right? So the process of switching the CPU from one process to another process is called as context switch. Context switch is time overhead. Context switch time is overhead to the system. Why? Because it's not the requirement of user to change from one process to another process. User want to just execute its task. And when context switch takes place, some memory read or write also takes place. And memory read write is always overhead to my or always overhead to my system because it takes more time to memory access than the in comparison to the computation time of the CPU. CPU is the fastest and memory is the slowest, right? So we can say that context switch is overhead to the system. So we have seen that multiple processes may be there in the system. If multiple processes are there in the system, where these processes can be there, where at what states multiple processes can be there in the system. If you look at our process state diagram, so there may be multiple processes in this state, might be possible, because this is the newly creation state of a process. There may be multiple processes in the main memory, like in the case of multi-programming system, where processes are waiting for acquisition of the CPU, right? And once a process acquired the CPU, its state has been changed from ready to running. And as we know that only one process can be in the running state for a CPU or for single CPU systems, right? So only one process can be there in the CPU at a time. There may be multiple processes which are waiting for some IO device. So again, in waiting state there may be multiple devices. There may be multiple devices in the terminated state. So overall, if we see, multiple processes can be there in the new state. Then there may be more than one process in the ready queue or ready state. There may be more than one process in the waiting state, right? So if more than one processes are there in any state, there has to be some queue or some space to hold those waiting processes. So we have three major queues with us regarding processes where a process may be waiting or where a process may be waiting for some event to occur, right? So job queue corresponds to the new state. So whenever a process is created, it will be submitted to job queue, and its state in the job queue is the new. From job queue, a process will be shifted to ready state, and in the ready state the queue is named as ready queue. Ready queue belongs to main memory, and when a process is in ready queue, it has been allocated all the resources and it is waiting for the CPU to get executed. So a process in ready queue is ready to execute. Device queues belongs to the waiting state or the IO devices. So when a process is waiting for some IO device, it is placed in the device queue, right? So there may be multiple processes in job queue, there may be multiple processes in ready queue, there may be multiple processes in the device queue, but only one process will be there in the running state, and that's why we don't have a requirement of the queue in the running state, right? And if we have multiple processes in our queues, there has to be some policy to pick up a process from these queues to shift to other state. If we talk about the job queue, a process has to be picked up from the job queue and has to be submitted to the ready queue. So the polisher or the program which selects a process from job queue is named as long-term scheduler. A scheduler is one which schedules the processes, which picks up a process or which defines the order in which the processes will go forward. That is the definition of scheduler. So long-term scheduler is one which picks up a process from job queue and put it to the ready queue. So long-term scheduler defines the degree of multi-programming of the system, because multi-programming means when multiple programs are loaded into main memory, and long-term scheduler is responsible to put a program from job queue to main memory. That's why this long-term scheduler is responsible for the degree of multi-programming, or long-term scheduler defines the degree of multi-programming, right? There may be two types of processes, or the processes can be categorized into two types: IO bound processes and CPU bound processes. So IO bound processes are those processes, IO bound processes means a process which is having more of IO instructions than the CPU instructions. Like a process may be executed in like CPU instructions, then IO instructions, then CPU instructions, then IO instructions, then CPU instructions, and so on. So CPU instructions means the computational instructions, IO instructions means some IO operations are required for those instructions. So IO bound processes are those processes in which more of the instructions are corresponding to IO devices and less are of computational instructions, whereas CPU bound processes are those processes which spend more of the time in the CPU as compared to the IO devices. So there has to be a proper balance between number of IO processes and number of CPU processes which are placed in the main memory of the system. And it is the responsibility of your long-term scheduler which puts processes into main memory. Why it is so important to have a proper balance between IO bound processes and CPU bound processes in the system? Because if all the processes are of IO bound processes in the system, so most of the processes will be computing the IO instructions, and when IO instructions are executed, CPU will be idle for that time. So you are underutilizing your CPU. This is the case of IO bound processes. If more of the IO bound processes are there in the system. Now the second case is if more of the CPU bound processes are there in the system, then CPU will only be able to execute one process at a time, and all the other processes will be waiting for the CPU, right? And IO devices are also idle because there are no instructions or no processes which requires IO devices. So you are underutilizing your IO devices in this case, and hence your throughput is also also less. So that's why there has to be a proper balance between IO bound processes and CPU bound processes, so that CPU is also busy and meanwhile your IO devices are also busy and overall throughput is increased, right? The second one is your short term scheduler. Short term scheduler works between ready queue and running queue, or sorry, the ready queue and the running state. It picks up a process from ready queue and assigns CPU to it, right? Why do we call it as a short term scheduler, and why do we call the another one as long term scheduler? Long term and short term schedulers are named based on the frequency, or based on the frequency of their execution. As we know that CPU changes its context among processes very rapidly. That's why we say that the scheduler which is responsible to schedule processes on the CPU is named as short term scheduler. It has to execute in very short span of time. And whereas long term scheduler picks up a new process and submit it to ready queue. So the frequency of submission of new processes into the system is not very fast, or you can say it is slow. That's why we say that the long term schedulers, right? We saw that schedulers, or the context switching of the CPU, is overhead to the system. Now let's have an example in this regard. CPU takes 10 milliseconds for selecting a process to execute for 100 milliseconds. What is the utilization of CPU? So this 10 milliseconds is required to select a process from the ready queue and placing this to the CPU, right? So we have to find out the utilization of CPU in this case. So utilization is the useful upon, or the used upon, total available. So used in this case is 100 millisecond only, because CPU's task is to execute something and it is executing for 100 millisecond. And the CPU was used for 100 millisecond plus 10 millisecond while selecting the process. The CPU was idle. So for how long CPU was available to you? 10 millisecond when the process is selected. Okay, instead that during that time CPU was idle, fine, but still that was reserved for your this system, or that was idle, that was not executing anything. So 10 millisecond plus 100 millisecond is the total time availability of your CPU, right? So utilization of the CPU is equal to useful is 100 millisecond upon total is 110 millisecond into 100. So this is the utilization of your CPU in this case. Now we will look at how a process can be created. A process can be created by a batch job. Similar kind of processes may be grouped together, and a batch of job or processes can be created. It may be created by interactive logon. A process may be created by operating system in order to provide some service, or an existing process can create a new process. So these are the four major ways in which a process can be, or a new process can be created. When a process is created, there may be two possibilities with regard to their execution. Concurrent execution of parent with child process. So a concurrent execution will take place for parent and the child process. Now the question comes, which process will execute first and which execute second between parent and child process? Parent will execute first or the child will execute first? Will parent execute first or the child execute second? In which order parent and child processes will execute is a question. So they will be executed in concurrent manner, but the order will be decided by your short-term scheduler. We cannot comment that parent will be executed first or the child will be executed first. It totally depends on your short-term scheduler that which process out of these two will be picked up to execute next. But definitely they will be executed in concurrent manner. That means in context switched manner. The parent waits until some or all of its children have terminated. So parent has to wait until its children have terminated. Why? Because parent is responsible to flush the memory of child processes address space. Right? Similarly, there are two possibilities with regard to address space. A child process is a duplicate of parent process. Here duplicate means the address space of child process is exactly the same copy as that of parent process. So even program counter, the address values child process is a duplicate of the parent process. That means the address space of your child process is exactly same as that of parent process. So program counter as well as all the register values of the CPU are same in child process and the parent process. So execution of child process will also start from where parent process is executing. Why? Because program counter value is also same in child process as of parent process, because both address spaces are same. And second is the child process has a program loaded into it. So once the duplicate copy of your parent process is created, now you can load a new program into child process's address space, because our motto was not to create a duplicate copy. Our purpose was to create a new process which will be assigned some new task, which will be assigned some new job, right? So a child process was created with exact duplicate copy of the parent process, and then we will load a new program into address space of the child process. So this will create a new process in the system. Fork system call is used to create a new process, and it copy the original process's address space to the newly created process. Fork function returns two values, two different values to parent process and newly created child process. Fork returns a 0 to the newly created child process and the process ID of the child process to the parent process. So once the fork function is executed, immediately a new process will be created, that is the child process. And if we talk about the parent process, the original process, in that original process, fork will return the PID of newly created process. And when we talk about the child process, the newly created process, fork returns 0 on successful creation. Very important to note, right? We will look at a simple program of fork. So here void main int PID. So PID is a variable of type integer. PID is equal to fork. We say that this is our original process P1, in which PID is equal to fork. When this system call is called, a new process, say C1, that is the child process, is created. Now execution of P1 and C1 will be concurrent. We don't know whether P1 will be executed first or P2 will be executed first, or in which manner P1 and C1 will be executed. So suppose we consider that P1 is executed first, that is the parent process. So in parent process, PID is equal to fork. So fork will return the PID of newly created child process. So suppose that is PID underscore C. So in parent process P1, PID value is equal to PID underscore C. That will be some non-zero value greater than 0 value. That means this if statement will be false. This PID equal to 0 statement again false. Else part will be executed in your parent process, and parent process will execute this wait function. Wait function is used to wait your parent process into this function until one of the child is completed, gets terminated, and your parent process will come out from this function when your parent process receives a terminate signal from the child process, which means your parent process will not be able to execute after this instruction until child process is terminated, right? So when parent process is waiting into this statement, meanwhile your child process gets executed, and as we discussed in previous slide, that your child process will start its execution exactly from same point where your parent process was executed after the fork statement. Why? Because at this point your child process was created, and when your child process was created, it was created with the exactly same address space as that of parent process. So at this point of time, your parent process was having program counter value that belongs to this instruction. So in your child process also, your program counter's value will be this same instruction, right? So in your child process, fork function returns 0 on successful completion. So in child process, PID value is equal to 0. This statement is false. It will come out PID equal to 0. It's true. Exec LP. Exec function is used to replace the program of a process in the address space. So first argument defines the location where your program is placed. So under the root directory, bin directory, in the bin directory, ls directory is there. So in this ls directory, there is a program named ls. So load this program with argument null to this child process to make it a new process of type ls that is different from your parent process, because parent process has just created a child process, and now parent process is waiting into this statement for your child to be terminated. So now we have created a totally different process than the parent process using fork and exec, right? So once this statement is executed, so your child process will execute ls, which displays directory list of directories and files of your present working directory, that is pwd, right? And then it will terminate its execution. So child process is terminated at this point. Once child is terminated, it will send a signal, termination signal about itself to the parent process, and once the parent process gets the termination signal, it will come out from this statement wait, and it will print the child complete and then exit 0. So this is how fork system call is used to create a duplicate process, and exec is used to replace the program code of a process, and we have created a totally new process using fork and exit. A process can be terminated in many ways. So one may be normal completion. A process may be terminated when the allocated time limit exceeded, when memory is unavailable, bounds, some violations, some protection error occurs, arithmetic error occurs, invalid instructions have been executed, some data misuse has been done by the process, operator or operating system intervention, like when we press Alt F4, parent is terminated or some parent request occurs to terminate the process. These are two system calls to terminate a process: exit and abort. Exit system call terminates a process and it also flushed out its memory, whereas abort terminates a process but it does not clear the allocated memory or the address space of a process. So that is the difference between exit and abort system calls. So a process not running means it's ready to execute, but as CPU is not allocated, so it is not able to execute. A process may be blocked when it is waiting for some IO. Dispatcher is a program which executes just after scheduler or the short-term scheduler, which is responsible to select a process from ready queue and it hands over that selected process to dispatcher. Then dispatcher will take this process from main memory and place it to the CPU. So scheduler selects a process from ready queue, or the short-term scheduler selects a process from the ready queue and hands it over to dispatcher. Then dispatcher will pick up this process and place it to the CPU. So that is the functionality of dispatcher. So in this diagram we can see that a running state is shown in the sky blue, a ready state is shown by this gray color, and blocked state processes are shown by this net, right? So you can see here there are overall 4 processors, because dispatcher is also a type of process. It also requires some CPU cycles when it is executed, because dispatcher is also a program of operating system which does some processing to shift your process from main memory to CPU. But you can see that at any point of time, out of these 3 user processes plus 1 system process, out of total 4 processes, only 1 process is executed at a time in the CPU. No more than 1 process gets executed in the CPU at any point of time, right? There may be multiple processes in the ready queue or ready state at a time, like at this particular time, process A and process C are in the ready state. Similarly, at this point of time, when dispatcher was executing, all the three user processes A, B, C are in the ready state. Now, out of these three processes A, B, C, your dispatcher will pick up process B and schedule it to the CPU, right? And execute it to the CPU, not schedule it basically. Scheduler has done its task. After scheduler has done its task, the dispatcher will pick up a process from ready queue and it place it to and places it to the CPU, right? So this is your ready queue. A new process is admitted to ready queue. From ready queue, dispatcher will place a process to processor. From processor, there may be two major events. Processes timeout happens when the allocated time expires of a process. It again submitted to ready queue, or a process may invoke some IO device, some IO event, and that process may be submitted to waiting state or the blocked queue. Now, if we have a single blocked queue or single queue for all the devices, there may be some head of blocking problem. Suppose we have one process at the starting of this queue which requires the printer resource. The second process also requires printer, but the third process requires to put some data or to store some data in the secondary memory. Now secondary memory is available to use, but because the first process is using printer and second process is also wanting the printer, so third process will not be able to come out until the ahead two processes are completed, right? Until this the leading two processes comes out from the queue, the third process will not be able to come out from the queue and will not be able to perform its task. So this problem is called as head of blocking problem. Now because of that because of this head of blocking problem, we have designed multiple device queues corresponding to each device. If we do so, the head of blocking problem can be overcome, right? So for printer, we can have one queue. For another printer, we can have one queue. If we have only one printer, there will be one queue for this printer. There may be one queue for another IO device. There may be one queue for the next IO device. So for all the IO device, we have separate queues. In this case, we have solved the problem of head of blocking problem. So for what reasons a process may be suspended? A process may be suspended because of swapping. A process may be suspended because of some interactive user request. A process may be suspended because its time slice has been expired. A process may be suspended because its parent process requested to do so. Right? So in these ways, under these circumstances, a process can be suspended. and when a process is suspended, it will be submitted to ready queue. Remember it. When a process is submitted, it will be submitted to ready queue. When to switch a process? When clock interrupt, process has been executed for the maximum allowable time slice. When this time slice is expired, a process has to switch. Some IO interrupt occurred. When IO interrupt occurs, that running process has to switch. When memory fault occurs, again memory address is in virtual memory, so it must be brought into main memory, and that is page fault. We will study more about page fault or the memory fault in detail in our coming sessions. A trap is type of error or exception occurred during your execution of program, may cause process to be moved to exit state. So it is like an interrupt. It is like an interrupt. Interrupts may be of two types: hardware interrupt and software interrupt. Software generated interrupts are normally called as a trap. Software generated interrupts are like floating point errors. So these are fixed in the occurrence nature, the time when it will occur. When that particular instruction is executed, which is having some floating point error, that interrupt will be generated, and until that instruction is not executed, that particular interrupt will not occur. So software generated interrupts are also called as trap, and hardware interrupts are simply called as interrupt. There may be some supervisor call such as file open. In that case also a process has to switch. Process communication, inter-process communication. There may be two ways in which IPC can be performed. One is direct communication and another one is indirect communication. In case of direct communication, a message will be sent or received directly to or from the process. So there will be two arguments. One is your process ID, to which a message has to send or from where a message has to receive, and the message. In case of indirect communication, we will create one common space like mailbox, where the sending process will put its data or put its message, and from where the receiving process will read the message. RPC is remote procedure call. When your process belongs to two different computers, remotely we have to send the message to remote process, right? And this process is called as RPC, remote procedure call. So IPC is required by cooperative processes, like one which can affect or be affected by the other process executing in the system. So they are called as cooperative processes. There are two models of IPC. One is shared memory and another one is message passing. Shared memory model is like the one which is shown in this figure, the second figure, right hand side figure. There are two processes, process A and process B. This is the architecture of memory. This is the memory at any point of time in which there are two processes, process A and process B. This is the kernel space. A common shared memory space is created by kernel in the user level, and these two communicating processes A and B will communicate through this common shared memory. So they will put their message to this common shared memory, and the reading or receiving process will read message from this space. Kernel will not intervene once it has been created this space and handed over this space to process A and B. Now it's responsibility of the program developer or the process developer creator to maintain the consistency of this common shared space, right? It's not the responsibility of kernel to have some consistency mechanism over this shared memory space. Whereas in case of message passing, the sending process will send or submit its message to kernel, then kernel will send the message to the receiving process, or the receiving process will receive message from the kernel. So every time kernel intervention is required in case of message passing. So overhead to the system in case of message passing is more than that in case of shared memory model, right? So when we want to share some big data, we will be prefer using the shared memory model of the IPC. So shared memory is faster than message passing because no kernel intervention is required. Shared memory is useful for exchanging large amount of data. System calls are required only to establish shared memory regions. So kernel intervention is required only to establish the shared memory. Once the shared memory is created, after onwards, kernel intervention is not required to exchange the data. Shared memory can be accessed directly by the processes because it is created in the user space. So processes can directly access the memory without any intervention of the kernel. Write condition at shared memory should be taken care by the process, not by the operating system. So this is the responsibility of process designer or the program developer to have some mechanism so that your shared memory write condition will be fulfilled to make the variables consistent. In case of message passing systems, they are useful for distributed environment when your processes belongs to different systems. Message passing implemented using system calls. So every time kernel intervention is required. Message passing is easy to implement. Message passing is useful for exchanging smaller amount of data. They are not preferred to exchange the large amount of data. So when two processes communicate with each other, synchronization is required. So blocking send means sending process is blocked until the message is received by the recipient, or here recipient may be a process or may be a mailbox depending on whether it is direct communication or indirect communication. Non-blocking send means sending process is not blocked. Blocking receive, the receiver blocks until a message is available. Non-blocking receive, the receiver retrieves either a valid message or a null. IPC can be implemented using pipes. So there are major two categories of pipes. One is ordinary pipes and another one is named pipes. So ordinary pipes are unidirectional, in which data is written by a process on one end and read by another process at other end. Pipe is treated as a special type of file, can be accessed by read or write system calls. So pipe is nothing but a common shared file by processes in which read and write system calls are used to read and write the data. Ordinary pipe can be used within a process only. That means between parent and child processes. Ordinary pipes cannot be used between two different processes. They can be only used between parent and child processes. So this is the diagrammatic representation of ordinary pipe, in which a parent and child can communicate to each other using this common shared file, in which there are two file descriptors. FD means file descriptor, FD0. So parent process will be using this FD0 for writing, and FD1 is used to read the data which was written by this parent process using FD1, and similarly child will also create its file descriptor to write data. So child will also write into this file on the writing end, that is FD0, and whatever has been written by the child process to this pipe will be read by this parent process with the help of same FD1 from the writing end. So point to note here is that this end of this pipe is writing end and this end of this pipe is reading end, right? So both child and parent will write to the one end, that is writing end. Here the child process FD0 is also writing to this end, and both parent and child process will be reading from the read end. If we look at the program for a simple or ordinary pipe, so we have defined a buffer size of 25, read end is 0, write end is 1, int main, char write message buffer underscore size equal to greetings. So we have written greetings string to buffer size, which was defined at size 25, then read message another array of size 25, fd2 integer array of size 2, which will be used to create the read and write end file descriptor for the ordinary pipe, pid underscore tpid to store the process id of child process into the parent process. Now creating the pipe, if pipe fd equal to -1, return some error. That means if our pipe is not created, return the error. Otherwise, fork a child process. Now point to note here is that pipe is created before the child process. If pipe is created after the child process, this pipe could not be able to accessible between parent and child process. So if we want to communicate parent and child process through ordinary pipes, we have to create the pipe before creation of the child process, right? So here PID is equal to fork. At this particular point, we have created the what? A new process, a new child process. So in our parent process, PID is equal to the process ID of child process, and in our child process, PID is equal to 0 if child process successfully created. So let's again consider our parent process first to execute. So in our parent process, PID is equal to some non-zero value. So this statement will be false. This statement is true. If that means it is the parent process. So close FD read end, because we don't want to read anything. Parent want to write only into this ordinary pipe. So that's why we want to close this unread or unused end of the pipe. So close function is used to close the pipe. What is pipe? Basically pipe is nothing but a shared file. So we are closing the shared file. Shared file means FD read end, and read end was 0. So FD 0. So file descriptor with 0 means reading end is closed. Similarly, parent is writing something to the pipe. So write what? FD right end. So FD right end means 1. So FD1 comma write message, and write message was greetings strlen write message plus 1. So write function requires the file descriptor to the file, the message, and how many bytes to write, right? Then close the FD write end. So here our parent process terminates at this particular point. Now let's come to the child process. So child process's execution will also start from the fork statement. So from here child will start. In child process, PID is equal to 0. This statement is false. This if is again false. It will come to else part. In else part, close FD right end, because child process doesn't want to write anything into the file. And then read FD read end, that means reading file descriptor, comma read message, comma buffer size. So in read function, first argument is the file descriptor from where the data has to read. The second argument is the variable in which your read data will be stored. Third argument is defining the size or the bytes that has to be read, that is your buffer size 25. And then printf read %s read underscore message, which you have read from the file descriptor or the ordinary pipe, which was written by your parent process at this point, and finally close the FD read. So this is about how ordinary pipes work. Now point to remember here is that ordinary pipes will only be shared between parent and the child process. Number 1. Number 2, Your pipe has to created before the child process has been created. If this pipe was created after the child process, this pipe will not be able to use to communicate between parent and the child process. Number third, you have to use file descriptor fd. This fd was passed as an argument to your pipe function or pipe system call to read and to write the message. For reading end, it is 0. For writing end, it is 1. So these 3 points are important here. So that's all about IPC.